2014. Today, hey, welcome to the GTFOutcast for October 17th, 2014. Today, as you can see, Taylor is not with us, but we do have a special guest, Jack Whitsitt. Jack, say hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Bo. I actually really appreciate being on here. It's nice to be back in civilization for a little bit.
Yeah, so Jack just got back from a several-month trip hiking the Appalachian Trail on and off and skipping around. And so he's going to tell us a little bit about that. This is going to be two parts to today's session. So we'll break after the first one and then come back. But want to hear a lot more about what Jack's been doing, as well as some of his motivations, some of the things that he found out, and maybe how that applies in real life, as we call it here, out of the Green Tunnel. So, Jack, why don't you just give us a quick overview? Tell us a little bit about what you were doing, why you did it, and we can go from there.
Sure thing. So this year, I kind of early on in the year, I decided that I wanted to have maybe a more agile life than I'd had in the past. I kind of felt like things were getting a little bit more constrained than I was happy with, maybe a little bit out of control in different ways. And I just wanted to have more control over how my life went than letting modern society control how my life went. So I've kind of split up the year into three different related projects, as it were. It's not that formal, but it helps to think about it like that. The first half, I kind of figured I need to get better control over myself, kind of a framework for operating independently on a day-to-day basis. So this was better dieting, this was better exercise, this was more formal engagement with work. So, you know, the get into better habits on a daily basis. And I went through kind of a data-driven approach for that, and was pretty successful in reining in the day-to-day activities under control. But more than that, I wanted to learn to take advantage of the reality around me a little bit better than I had, a little bit more actively, being a little bit less subject to the whims of other people or just random chance. So the second stage of that is really to go spend some time away from civilization a little bit, to learn what it's like just to be yourself without any constraints, to get rid of all of the extra fluff and excess in life. Not necessarily because I wanted to be a hermit permanently, and honestly, I don't think that's particularly for me a great way to live. But you learn a little bit about what your levers are, about what your points of control are, what is important to you and what's not, and you get to have long conversations with yourself as well. And then the third stage, which I'm just getting into, is now that I've kind of jettisoned the parts of my life that were extraneous, what parts do I want to keep? Is there anything I want to add back? How do I really maintain an agile lifestyle for the rest of my life?
Very cool. So you mentioned you took a data-driven approach to kind of getting your life in order. Why don't you talk a little bit more about what that means, how you did it, anything you learned, or anything you want to share with other folks?
Okay, so I obviously I'm in my mid-30s, so this isn't the first time I've thought to myself about getting life under control. What made this time different was instead of following kind of typical sets of advice about what to do, I actually went and tried to hack myself. I mean, I'm a security person, at heart, so I spent a lot of time thinking about what are triggers, what are areas in my life, decision points, or behaviors that lead to cascading effects. What is the most efficient, effective way to make change? So, for example, I looked at alcohol ended up being a big part of it. Not because necessarily I had an alcohol addiction problem, but I wasn't sleeping very often. It affected things like I would get home late at night with my friends. I lived with a bunch of really, really, really great people, and everybody would get home and you'd order a bunch of crappy food at 4 a.m. And so when you start looking at all the secondary effects of that in my life, on a very personal thing as opposed to some biological thing, then that was actually a really, really important thing to just give up for the year. And so just go, okay, if I'm not going to drink, then all of a sudden all these secondary consequences started happening that were positive. But that's a big thing. But even I looked at things as small as how the shape of food containers. Because in some cases you would open something and you wouldn't actually be able to close it again without consuming the whole thing.
Right, yeah.
So sizing different things, it was interesting. Beyond that, I was, I got the first Basis B1 watch for tracking your heart rate and stuff like that, and when you slept and measuring all of that. I went through and looked at, I had this incredibly complicated spreadsheet about calorie consumption. I actually took as many different foods as I could find, didn't pay attention to necessarily what I liked at the moment, but actually did the math for what effective combinations I could have that met everybody's advice on what was healthy. And it's really, really hard because so much of it's contradictory, so much of it's to find the actual intersection of what that is incredibly difficult. And this is, I'm talking about food at the moment, but I try to apply this to different areas of my life as well. Scheduling for work, because I work from home, readjusting the math. So instead of actually necessarily working 8 hours a day in a row, how can I build in patterns that just match how my brain works? To date, I'm within, I think I spec'd out how much weight I wanted to lose per day, and I'm within 0.01 pounds per day for the year of what I originally wrote down.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, it sounds like that approach is very analytical, kind of breaking everything down, understanding the components, dependencies, the interactions, and then synthesizing something new, and almost designing your lifestyle based on what you've learned through the analysis of your current lifestyle and your goals. So that's really, really cool. That's a very kind of together approach. I couldn't do something like that. I'm way too haphazard and ad hoc, but that's really cool.
And I think I am too. And I think that's what made it such an interesting process for me was I'll probably not live the rest of my life like this, but you learn enough about the stuff and you get good enough that you don't have to be so formal about it. Okay, this vaguely works. And, so, since I've been back off the trail, I'm like, I'll have a glass of wine because I know I've now trained myself out of the parts of that were problematic.
Yeah.
I moved from walking and driving to, well, actually, let me say this a little better way. For a long time early in the year, I was able to walk everywhere. I lived in Washington, D.C., and I moved to a different location that didn't have nearly as much walking access to things. So I made sure to go get a bike. I hadn't biked in 10 years, but I needed a way to embed things in, and that's really probably the theme, is how do you embed more agile behavior in your daily life instead of making an exception? It's really easy to go, I'm going to spend an hour a day doing this, and going, I don't have time today.
Right.
It's different when, in order to get to work, you have to go do something else productive. And that's kind of the hacking that went into it.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. That's like, the times when, I used to travel all the time. Every week I was on a different plane going to a different city. And to be able to maintain that intensity of going all over the place, you have to have certain things that match a certain pattern. You have to be able to know my car keys are always right there. Like my wallet is always right there. So you have those things that are always the same, always consistent. So no matter what else goes on, when you have to go and do those crazy things or the chaotic things, you've got that routine and that pattern that kind of throws you into it, and you know that you're going to be prepared for whatever comes at you. And I also like something else you talked about, which is breaking it down to really simple decisions. Yes, no, right?
Yes.
Should I have a glass of wine? Should I not? That's like a really easy decision that a lot of people underestimate the power of just saying yes or no to those, and building your lifestyle so that you have those simple choices to make.
Right.
I did vegetarian for a week, a month. It's been a long time ago. And it was really easy to just sit down at a restaurant. Okay, well, now I have a decision to make, vegetarian or not, right? And for a month, I chose vegetarian, which was really hard at 4 a.m. in Vegas at the end of DEF CON when all that's open is Burger King. Like, how do you go into Burger King and be like, just cheese and bread, please? So, that's making those decisions easier for yourself by making the choices simpler is really cool. It's something that it's called choice architecture if you study it formally, which is a kind of a fascinating field I've never looked into too deeply, but it's always been interesting to me.
You hit on two really, really important points, and I'd like that you reinforce them from the conversation. One, I'll start with the choices, because I don't really want to make this conversation about the diet or the food stuff, but when you're living a natural life, you want choices that are practicable at all times.
Yes.
And when I'm looking at this, at how I chose to be eating this year, I actually have two completely different diets. One of them is for when I'm home, when I have absolute freedom and flexibility over what I do.
Right.
But I thought about it. I can't really practice the same things when I'm out with friends, which happens sometimes 5 days a week, as I can at home. And
Right.
trying to force those two sets of behaviors into one container, it just doesn't make sense.
Right.
And so what I allow myself to do when I'm out is constrained and it's structured, but it's different than when I'm allowed to do myself at home. That way I don't get into situations where I have to make choices that are actually untenable.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's resonated both through the hike and through the first half of the year.
Yeah.
And the second point that you highlighted is definitely something that came out of the hike as well as the first half of the year, which is, we're overwhelmed by patterns because it actually takes a lot of repetition in modern society to live. Like if you go off pattern, your taxes go sideways and bills go sideways. Like life is complicated. It's really complicated.
Yeah, give us just a couple minutes to sign off. All right, so well, this is I guess the end of part 1, and we'll pick up part 2 in just a few minutes if you're watching live, or you can catch it immediately if you are tuning in afterwards.
Thanks, bud.